Good morning, year 3 and 4. Just going to start with our next part of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. We were up to from yesterday where there'd been lots of strange goings on all around town and Mr. Dursley was quite disturbed. And he went to bed thinking that even if it was anything to do with the Potters, they couldn't really affect them. And it ended saying how very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the far corner of Privet Drive. It didn't so much as a quiver when a car door slammed into the next street, nor when 2 owls swooped overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner where the cat had been watching. Appeared so suddenly and silently that you'd have thought he popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and his eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen in Privet Drive. He was tall, thin and very old. Judging by the silver of his hair and beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes and a purple cloak which swept the ground and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realise that he'd just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots was very unwelcome. He was busy rummaging in his cloak, looking for something, but he did seem to realise he was being watched because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He had found what he was looking for inside his pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, he held it into the air and clicked. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the putter-outer until only lights left in the whole street were 2 tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the putter-outer back into his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the markings the cat had round its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun, and she looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly." "You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? You could have been celebrating. I passed dozens of feasts and parties on my way here." "Oh yes, everyone's celebrating, all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they'd be a bit more careful, but no, even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent. I bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little time to celebrate for 11 years. "I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably, "but that's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless. Out in the street in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumours." She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something. But he didn't, so she went on. "A fine thing would be if on the very day of you-know-who seems to have disappeared at last, the Muggles found out about us all. I suppose he really has gone." "Dumbledore?" "It certainly seems so," said Dumbledore. "We have much to be thankful for. Would you care for a lemon sherbet?" "A what?" "A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet. I'm rather fond of them." "No, thank you," said Professor McGonagall coldly, as she thought as though she didn't think it was the perfect moment for a sherbet lemon. As I say, even if you know who has gone, my dear Professor, surely a sensible person like you can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense for 11 years. I have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name, Voldemort. Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 sherbet lemons, seemed to not even notice. It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. I know you haven't, said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated but half admiring. But you're different. Everyone knows you're the only one, you know. Oh, all right, Voldemort was frightened of. You flatter me, said Dumbledore calmly. Voldemort had powers I'll never have. Only because you're too, well, noble to use them. It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs. Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, The owls are nothing to the rumours that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying about why he's disappeared, about what's finally stopped him. It seemed that Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss, the real reason she had been waiting in the cold, hard wall all day, for neither as a cat nor a woman she had fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did right now. It was plain that what everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore had told her it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What are they saying? What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up at Godric's Hollow. He went to find the Potters. The rumour is that Lily and James Potter are... Well, that they've died. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James. I can't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. Oh, Albus, Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying he tried to kill Potter's son, Harry. But he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that when he couldn't kill Harry Potter, Voldemort's power suddenly broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just astounding, of all the things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry manage to survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a look at his golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands and no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, but because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid is late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, and I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places. I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left now. You don't mean... You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet, pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got a son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, and come and live here? It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter, repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore, you think you can explain all of this in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in future. There'll be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very serious over the top of his half-moon's glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head, famous before he can walk and talk, famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be growing up away from all that until he's ready to take it? Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed and said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought it might be hiding Harry underneath it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly. But you can't pretend he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for a sign of a headlight. It swelled and roared as they both looked at the sky. A huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed on the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, it was nothing to the man sitting astride it. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed. And so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and a beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in his leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. Hagrid, said Dumbledore, sounding relieved, at last. And where did you get that motorbike? Borrowed it, Professor McGonagall, sir, said the giant, climbing carefully off the motorbike as he spoke. Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir. No problems were there? No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out all right before the muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent over towards a bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet black hair over his forehead, they could see a curious shaped cut like a lightning bolt. Is that where? Professor McGonagall whispered. Yes, said Dumbledore. He'll have that scar forever. Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore? Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground. We'll give him here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with. Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursleys' house. Could I say goodbye to him, sir? Asked Harry. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry, gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. Shh! Hissed Professor McGonagall. You'll wake the muggles. Sorry, sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor little Harry off to live with muggles. Yes, it's very sad, but get a grip of yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found. Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on the arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low-walled garden and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took out a letter from his cloak, tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the 3 of them stood there and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. Well, said Dumbledore finally, that's it. We've no business staying here. We may as well go and enjoy the celebrations. Yeah, said Hagrid in a very muffled voice. I'd best get this bike back. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir. Wiping his streaming eyes on his sleeve, Hagrid swung himself on the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall, said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner he stopped, took out his silver putter outer, clicked it once, and all 12 balls of light sped back into the street lamps, so that Privet Drive glowed suddenly orange, and he could make out Tabby Cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets on the step of number 4. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, And he slept on, not knowing he was so special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he'd be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he'd spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know at this very moment people meeting in secret all over the country were holding their glasses and saying hushed voices to Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Okay, and we will do chapter 2 tomorrow. Okay, bye.